The hall glowed under warm golden lights, chandeliers scattering prisms across polished marble floors. Guests in black ties and shimmering gowns filled every seat, their chatter carrying a sharp edge of anticipation. Tonight was Ryan's night. His company's debut, the culmination of years of late nights and borrowed confidence, a stage big enough for him to finally be seen. I should have been proud. I had been the steady hand behind him, the quiet wife who smiled at investor dinners, the one who soothed his frustration when prototypes failed, the one who never asked where the money really came from. The daughter of a billionaire hiding my inheritance under silk gloves. I never told him the truth because I wanted love that wasn't tainted by numbers. I thought I had found it. The lights dimmed. A hush spread through the crowd like velvet being drawn across the room. The spotlight flared to the stage. My husband should have been there, center stage, commanding the moment, but he wasn't. Grace Williams stepped into the light. Her heels clicked with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this entrance. She held the microphone with both hands, smiling like a queen addressing her court. She wasn't in the background. She wasn't waiting for Ryan's cue. She was the cue. Gasps fluttered through the audience. A few laughed lightly, assuming it was some new marketing strategy. I knew better. My stomach tightened, a knot pulling hard. My palms pressed against my silk dress, trying to ground myself. I looked for Ryan and found him standing just behind her, not at the podium where he belonged. His eyes glowed in the spotlight, but not because of the company, because of her. The way he looked at Grace was the way he used to look at me. Her voice filled the hall, rehearsed and sure. Tonight we bring you a vision, a company built on courage, risk, and the power of trust. Trust. The words sliced into me. She glanced back at Ryan and he nodded, proud and smiling. Their closeness wasn't subtle. Their hands brushed on the podium, lingered. No colleague touched a man like that. No wife watched her husband glow for another woman. I kept my posture perfect. My father had always told me, control the room, control the game. So I didn't move, didn't blink. My knuckles tightened around the clutch bag in my lap until the leather creaked. Around me applause roared. The crowd was charmed, dazzled. Only I felt the heat crawling up my neck, the humiliation burning beneath my skin. I smiled, brittle, painted a mask. No one would see me break. Not here. Ryan stepped forward briefly, placing a hand on Grace's shoulder as if crowning her. He didn't see me stiffen. He didn't care. His voice was smooth as he said, "This company is about partnership, about vision, about knowing the right person to stand beside you." The audience clapped louder. I clapped too, but the sound of my palms striking felt hollow, violent against my skin. It wasn't applause. It was a warning to myself, a countdown. Grace leaned into the microphone again. We wouldn't be here tonight without sacrifice, without someone believing when no one else did. My breath caught. For a moment I thought she might acknowledge me. I had been the one sitting through Ryan's late-night rants, the one signing off checks disguised as consulting fees, the one pretending not to notice how his suit smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. But Grace didn't look at me. She looked at him. Ryan's smile widened as if the compliment belonged to him, as if I wasn't even in the room. I shifted slightly in my seat. My bracelet slid down my wrist with a soft metallic chime, a sound only I heard. A reminder I came from a different world than this circus. My father's empire didn't need Ryan's startup to shine. But I had chosen silence, chosen love over power. And now silence was crushing me. The speech continued, each word another nail in the coffin of my marriage. I barely registered the numbers Grace rattled off: projections, partnerships, markets. All I saw was the way Ryan's body angled toward her, protective, almost possessive. He belonged to her in this room, and they didn't care who noticed. When the presentation ended, the hall thundered with applause. People rose to their feet. Champagne corks popped in the back. Investors whispered eagerly, scribbling notes, ready to throw money at Ryan and Grace. I stood slowly, smoothing the satin folds of my dress. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I joined the standing ovation. But my eyes never left Ryan. He looked like a man who had finally arrived. And I looked like a wife no one would remember. Except they would. Because I wasn't just Ryan's wife. I was Elena Carter, my father's daughter. The heir he had raised to smile at betrayal, to hold her silence until the knife was sharp enough. And tonight, as I clapped with everyone else, I wasn't breaking. I was planning. The applause still echoed in my ears as the crowd drifted toward the reception hall. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like clockwork, balancing trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. I walked among them as if on autopilot, my smile fixed in place, my heart pounding with a rhythm that didn't match the music. "Mrs. Carter, congratulations." A woman in emerald silk clasped my arm with a rehearsed warmth. "Your husband is a visionary." And Grace? Oh, she was spectacular, wasn't she? Spectacular. The word dug under my skin like glass. I thanked her politely, nodding as though I agreed, though I barely remembered what my voice sounded like. Inside, the word repeated, hammering. Spectacular. Not me, not his wife. Her. I caught sight of Ryan across the room, already surrounded by eager investors. He laughed, throwing his head back, his hand resting comfortably on Grace's lower back as if it belonged there. They moved like partners rehearsed, and natural, two bodies tuned to the same rhythm. My blood chilled. I didn't approach them. Not yet. Instead, I slipped toward the edge of the hall where the light was softer and fewer people lingered. A waiter offered me a flute of champagne. I took it, wrapping my fingers tightly around the delicate stem. The glass trembled in my grip. I tilted it slightly, watching the bubbles race upward, and only then realized how tightly I was holding it. My lipstick left a deep red stain along the rim, a mark, visible proof of my restraint cracking. If I pressed harder, the stem would snap. I set it down before I lost control. Conversations hummed around me, laughter punctuating the air. Yet every sound seemed dulled, muffled by the roar inside my chest. My eyes flicked toward Ryan again. He leaned in close to whisper to Grace, his lips brushing near her ear. Her smile widened, radiant, rehearsed. The intimacy wasn't hidden. It was flaunted. "Mrs. Carter." The voice startled me. I turned to find an older gentleman standing nearby, adjusting his glasses. Recognition came quickly. Daniel Ruiz, my father's lawyer. He had handled my inheritance for years, a quiet shadow in every legal matter, a man I rarely spoke to directly. His presence here was unusual. He bowed his head slightly, his voice low. "You should be careful tonight." I blinked. Careful? His eyes shifted toward Ryan and Grace, then back to me. His gaze carried weight, the kind of weight that wasn't about gossip, but about danger. I opened my mouth, but he shook his head almost imperceptibly and stepped back into the crowd before anyone could notice him near me. I was left holding questions with no answers, my pulse still racing. Daniel had always been discreet but never dramatic. For him to appear here at this event and to warn me, it meant something. Something larger than a wandering husband and his mistress. But I couldn't chase after him now. Not in this room. The night dragged on like a masquerade I hadn't agreed to attend. Guests toasted to the company's future, clinking glasses, while I floated between conversations like a ghost. I nodded. I smiled. I murmured pleasantries. But every time my eyes returned to Ryan, laughter spilling from his mouth, my chest tightened. By the time we left, my face hurt from holding the mask in place. The car ride home was a coffin of silence. The city lights flickered past the tinted windows, casting fleeting shadows across Ryan's smug expression. He tapped out a message on his phone, grinning faintly at the screen. He didn't bother hiding it. Finally, he glanced at me. "You were quiet tonight." I turned my head toward the glass, watching neon streaks blur by. Was I? "You barely smiled. People noticed." His tone sharpened, shifting from casual to accusatory. "You should have looked proud, supportive. It was an important night for me. For him. Always for him." I said nothing. My silence stretched between us, taut as wire. Ryan huffed, shifting in his seat. "If you're upset about Grace speaking, you need to get over it. She's valuable." She knows how to handle a crowd. Not everything is about you." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. I pressed my hands into my lap nails, biting into my palms until I felt the sting. He thought he was winning by lecturing me. He didn't realize I wasn't his opponent in this moment. I was his executioner, sharpening the blade in silence. He smirked, satisfied with himself, and returned to typing on his phone. The screen's glow lit up his face like a confession. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I looked out the window, my reflection staring back at me. My eyes were calm, too calm. My father's words echoed again. Control the room, control the game. Ryan thought tonight had been his triumph. He didn't know it was only the beginning of his unraveling. The morning after the launch, I awoke to the faint smell of espresso drifting through the kitchen. Ryan was already dressed, suit jacket slung over a chair, his phone pressed to his ear as he paced. He didn't notice me standing in the doorway. His voice carried that clipped, commanding tone he reserved for investors. "Yes, I'll have Grace coordinate. She knows the pitch better than anyone. No, Elena doesn't handle business matters, she prefers to stay out of it." My stomach tightened. He said it so casually, as if I were an accessory, not a partner. As if Grace had already taken my place in every arena that mattered. When he spotted me, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, you seemed tired last night. Don't overthink things, Elena. The debut was a success. Investors love Grace. You should too." He kissed my cheek as though nothing had shifted, grabbed his keys, and was gone. The silence he left behind was louder than his voice. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the untouched espresso he had poured for himself. Daniel's warning echoed in my mind. Be careful tonight. It hadn't been about humiliation. It had been about something deeper, something dangerous. By noon, I dialed Daniel. He answered on the second ring, his voice measured, steady. "Mrs. Carter." I wondered how long it would take. We arranged to meet at his office. His building was tucked into the financial district, a place I rarely visited since my father's passing. The lobby smelled faintly of leather and old books, a kind of permanence that reminded me of my childhood afternoons spent listening to my father's clipped conversations with men who handled more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. Daniel greeted me with a nod, gesturing me toward his office. It was lined with mahogany shelves stacked with leather-bound volumes, certificates framed neatly, a single crystal decanter on his desk. He poured 2 glasses of water, slid one toward me, and then folded his hands. "I saw enough last night," he began. "And I think you've seen enough too." I leaned forward. "Tell me what you meant. Why warn me?" He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing whether I was ready for the truth. Finally, he opened a folder on his desk and turned it toward me. My father's handwriting marked the margins in blue ink. I recognized it instantly. "This is your trust," Daniel said. "Your inheritance is structured with specific clauses. One of them ties access to your funds directly to marital consent. Your father feared someone might try to use you for your name, your resources. He made sure no husband could access anything without your approval." I traced the lines of ink with my eyes. The words blurred not from confusion, but from anger rising in my chest. Daniel continued, his voice low. "Ryan has been pressing quietly. He's asked for copies of these documents more than once. Grace has contacted our office under the guise of business representation. They're not just building a company, they're building a strategy to move you out of the way." My breath caught. "Move me out." "They want control," Daniel said simply. "Of the funds, of the power that only you hold. Without you, the company doesn't survive. Ryan knows it. Grace knows it. That's why she was at the podium. It wasn't a slip. It was a signal." I gripped the folder, my knuckles white. The humiliation I had endured at the launch suddenly felt like the surface of something darker. This wasn't just betrayal of vows. It was theft, planned and polished, paraded under spotlights. Daniel's eyes softened, though his voice stayed firm. "Your father trusted me to protect you, but the choice is yours. You can keep quiet, let Ryan maneuver, risk losing everything, or you can act." For the first time in months, the air felt sharp in my lungs. I closed the folder, slowly sliding it back across the desk. "I'll act," I said. On the drive home, the city looked different. The glass towers no longer gleamed with possibility. They glared back at me like witnesses, silent accomplices to a betrayal I had been too blind to see. My reflection in the window was calm, but inside every nerve was sparking. Ryan was home when I arrived, sprawled across the sofa with his laptop. He looked up briefly. "Long day." "Just errands," I replied. My voice was even steady. He didn't hear the storm underneath. He turned back to his work. "Grace is drafting the next presentation. Investors want to see more of her." He said it without hesitation, without shame, as if I were invisible. I stood there silent, watching the man I once loved map out his empire with another woman by his side. For years I had hidden my true self, my inheritance, because I wanted a marriage untouched by money. I had believed in the purity of love, but love, I realized now, was the very mask he had used to climb into power. That mask was about to shatter. I walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a pen and notepad. My hand trembled only once before it steadied. I began to write, not notes of affection, not another empty list of dinner guests, but the first outline of a speech that would end everything. The following morning, the sky was overcast, heavy clouds pressing down on the city. I woke before Ryan, lying still in the hush of our bedroom, listening to his steady breathing. He looked peaceful, almost boyish in sleep, but I knew better now. That face wasn't innocence. It was calculation disguised as charm. By the time he stirred, I was already dressed, seated at the dining table with coffee cooling beside me. The paper lay open in front of me, though I hadn't read a single word. My thoughts had been looping endlessly, circling Daniel's warning, the trust clauses, the image of Ryan's hand resting so casually on Grace's back. Ryan padded into the room, barefoot hair, tousled, the kind of look that once made me soften. He kissed my head as though habit, then poured himself coffee. "Big day ahead," he said. "Meetings stacked." I looked at him over the rim of my mug. "With Grace?" The question hung in the air like smoke. He stiffened almost imperceptibly, then forced a laugh. "She's part of the team, Elena. Don't start this again." I set my cup down carefully. "I just asked." His jaw tightened. He hated when I didn't rise to the bait. He thrived on arguments where he could play the victim, the reasonable husband forced to defend himself. My calm unnerved him. "Look," he said, leaning against the counter. "Grace is brilliant at what she does. Investors listen to her. She makes things smoother for everyone. You could try being more supportive instead of suspicious." Supportive. Suspicious. The words were designed to shame me, to make me question my instincts. I didn't flinch. "She certainly seemed comfortable at the podium." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I tilted my head, my tone even. "It means she looked like she's done it before, with you beside her." For a moment, silence pressed between us, thick and brittle. He set his cup down too hard, the porcelain clinking against the marble countertop. "You're being paranoid," he snapped. "You're always trying to see shadows where there aren't any. I can't build a future if my own wife undermines me." Undermines. As if his betrayal was my fault. I let a faint smile cross my lips, one he couldn't quite read. "Then I'll try to stay out of your way." He frowned, suspicious now, but also relieved that I didn't push further. That was his weakness. He mistook silence for surrender. The day moved sluggishly, tension seeping into every corner of the house. Ryan left in a rush, muttering about deadlines. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the echo of his accusations. I wandered into his study. It smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink, the scent of ambition. Papers cluttered his desk, contracts, pitch drafts, investor lists. I didn't touch them. Not yet. But the sight only sharpened my resolve. His empire looked impressive on paper, but I knew the truth. Without me, it was nothing but smoke. Later that evening, I sat across from him at dinner. The steak cooled on my plate as I studied him. Ryan chatted about his day, about investor enthusiasm, about how Grace nailed a tricky question during a meeting. He spoke her name with pride, the way a man should speak of his wife. Grace this, Grace that. I let the repetition echo in my mind like a chant. Each mention tightened the coil of anger inside me. I cut into my steak slowly. You talk about her a lot. Ryan chuckled as if amused by my observation. Because she deserves it. She's earned her place. I looked at him steadily. At your side? The fork froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes flicked up sharp and defensive. For a second I thought he'd lash out, but then he smiled slow and cold. Careful, Elena. Jealousy doesn't suit you. Jealousy. He dismissed betrayal with a single word, twisting the blame back onto me. I dabbed my mouth with a napkin, folding it neatly. Maybe not. But silence does. He stared at me, confused by the calmness in my tone. He didn't realize the double edge of my words. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was preparation. That night, as he snored softly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every word he'd spoken replayed in my head, each one layering over the last, until they formed a wall. But walls could be broken. I thought of Daniel's folder, my father's signature scrawled along the edges of protection I hadn't even realized I'd been living under. My father had known this day might come. He had known someone would try to strip me of more than love. Ryan believed my quiet meant surrender. But I wasn't surrendering. I was sharpening, testing, waiting for the perfect moment to make him understand exactly who he had underestimated. When dawn crept through the curtains, I finally closed my eyes, not in defeat, but in resolve. The game had shifted, and I was no longer afraid to play. The house was silent that night, the kind of silence that hums just beneath the skin. Ryan had fallen asleep on the sofa, his laptop abandoned, his phone charging on the end table. The screen glowed faintly, its lock screen darkened except for the battery icon pulsing green. I moved carefully, my footsteps muffled by the rug. He stirred once, shifting deeper into the cushions, his breath thick with exhaustion. The phone vibrated softly against the table. A notification flashed, then another. Curiosity wasn't what drove me. I already knew the truth. It was certainty. I craved something tangible, undeniable, a blade I could sharpen into proof. When I touched the phone, it lit up instantly. Unlocked. My pulse spiked. He'd grown so careless, so arrogant, he hadn't even secured the thing that held his secrets. I opened the messages. The thread with Grace was pinned at the top. The first few were innocuous enough, business-related, the kind of exchanges he'd parade in front of anyone. But then I scrolled further. My breath caught as words bled across the screen. I couldn't stop thinking about you after last night. Soon we won't have to hide. Soon it will be ours. There were photos, two blurred hotel rooms, his face leaning close to hers, the curve of her smile pressed against his shoulder. Images that cut deeper than any suspicion ever had. I kept scrolling, my fingers trembling, but steady enough. Screenshots of receipts, dinners paid for at places he'd claimed were networking events. Plans for future trips disguised as conferences. Notes about investor meetings where Grace's name appeared again and again, not as an employee, but as a partner. And then worse. Once the transfer is done, it'll be ours to run. She'll step aside eventually. She's not built for this world. Me. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. Grace wasn't just his mistress. She was his co-conspirator. They weren't stealing moments in hotel rooms. They were stealing my life. The phone buzzed again. A new message appeared, as though the universe wanted me to see it. Don't worry, Ryan. She's too naive to ever figure it out. Naive. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my hands steady. I opened my email on his phone, attached the screenshots, and sent them to myself. Evidence. A lifeline. When I placed the phone back on the table, it looked untouched, still glowing softly beside him. Ryan snored, oblivious. I stood over him for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. Once I would have leaned down, brushed his hair from his forehead, kissed him gently. But that part of me was dead. Instead, I whispered so quietly only I could hear, "You're not building an empire, Ryan. You're digging your grave." The next morning, I moved through the motions like a ghost. Coffee brewed, toast popped, sunlight streamed across the marble countertops. Ryan sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable. "Busy day," he muttered, sipping his coffee. "Grace is coming by later. We're finalizing investor decks." "Grace." "Always Grace." I smiled faintly, sliding a plate toward him. "You two seem inseparable these days." He glanced up, wary. "Don't start." "I'm not," I said smoothly. "I admire how much trust you have in her." "Trust." The word lingered in the air. He didn't notice the bite beneath it. He chuckled instead, his arrogance dripping. "She earns it. Some people just get it." I tilted my head, feigning thoughtfulness. "And some people give too much without realizing it." His eyes flickered briefly, then he returned to his phone, dismissing me. He thought he'd won the conversation. He thought I was too soft, too naive to ever confront him. But I had what I needed now. I had proof. Later that afternoon, I sat in my study, the folder Daniel had shown me spread open on the desk. My father's clauses, my inheritance protections, my safety net. Alongside them, my laptop glowed with the evidence I'd pulled from Ryan's phone messages, photos, plans. Two worlds colliding, the legal and the personal, the trust of a father who had seen too far, and the betrayal of a husband who hadn't seen enough. I leaned back in the chair, my eyes tracing the ceiling, my chest rising with a steady rhythm. I wasn't grieving anymore. I wasn't even angry in the way I had been. I was clear. Ryan thought love had made me blind. He thought silence had made me weak. But silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The evidence sat like a loaded weapon, and I was done pretending not to know how to use it. Daniel's office smelled faintly of leather and old wood, the scent of permanence. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching the dust motes drifting lazily above the mahogany desk. I had come prepared this time, the screenshots from Ryan's phone stored safely on a flash drive in my bag, my face composed into calm determination. Daniel rose as I entered, nodding respectfully. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted. "Daniel." I returned. My voice was even, but inside I was bracing myself. We sat across from each other, a gulf of polished wood between us. He studied me for a long moment as if measuring my resolve. Then he spoke. "I'll be direct. Ryan has been pressing harder. He contacted our office again last week, requesting documents regarding your trust. Grace followed up with calls. They framed it as business planning, but the language was insistent, aggressive." I clenched my hands in my lap. He didn't mention it. Daniel's expression didn't soften. Of course not. What he seeks is control. He believes, perhaps because of Grace, that if he can convince you to sign an amendment, he will have authority over substantial portions of your inheritance, enough to bind your future to his company. I exhaled slowly, the betrayal sinking deeper, heavier. He wasn't satisfied with humiliating me in public, with making me invisible in my own marriage. He wanted to strip me of everything my father had built. Daniel slid a document across the desk. "Your father anticipated this. The clauses are ironclad. Ryan cannot access a cent without your consent. But he will try. And he may not be above deceit to get it." I opened the folder. Legal jargon filled the pages, but one line glared back at me. "No husband, spouse, or legal partner may access, transfer, or amend the terms without the explicit written consent of the heir." My father had seen this coming. Somehow, even in death, he was still protecting me. I looked up. "If Ryan thinks he can force me?" Daniel raised a hand gently. "Then you must be ready. He will pressure you. Grace will encourage it. They may attempt manipulation, even falsification. But you have two advantages: your father's foresight and your own knowledge. You know now what they are planning. That changes everything. I nodded, the weight of clarity settling into my chest. Daniel, I said softly. He's already betrayed me. For the first time, his professional mask cracked. I know. I reached into my bag, placed the flash drive on his desk, and slid it toward him. This is from his phone. Messages, photos, plans, proof. Daniel hesitated before picking it up, then tucked it into a drawer. Good, very good. Keep gathering what you can. Evidence makes power undeniable. I swallowed hard. What happens next? He leaned forward. That depends on you. You could file immediately divorce asset protection injunctions against his company. You would win, but it would be loud, public, and brutal. Or, he paused, studying me. You could wait. Let him build higher. The higher the climb, the harder the fall. Silence stretched between us. I thought of Ryan's smile as he placed his hand on Grace's back. I thought of the crowd applauding her while I sat invisible. And I thought of my father's words echoing like a drumbeat in my mind. Control the room, control the game. I'll wait, I said finally. My voice didn't shake. Daniel nodded once, approving. Then prepare yourself. Patience will be your weapon. But when you strike, do not hesitate. The ride home was quiet, the city rushing past outside the car window. I pressed my fingers against the glass, the coolness grounding me. My reflection stared back, calm, poised, but underneath a storm was gathering. At home, Ryan was waiting in the kitchen. He was on the phone, his voice low and clipped. When he saw me, he ended the call quickly, too quickly. Where were you? He asked, his tone casual but edged. Errands, I said lightly, setting down my bag. His eyes narrowed. He didn't press, but suspicion flickered across his face. The man who thought I was naive was starting to wonder. Good. Let him wonder. Over dinner, he launched into talk about investors, about Grace's incredible instincts, about how she had smoothed over concerns with her charm. Every word was another spark, but I stayed silent, nodding when appropriate. Finally, he looked at me directly. You don't seem excited. I set down my fork. I'm listening. He leaned back, frowning. Sometimes I think you don't understand what I'm building. Grace does. She believes in me. The jab was intentional, sharp. I smiled faintly, refusing to let it pierce. Then I'm glad you found someone who believes. For a moment, confusion flickered in his eyes. Then arrogance returned and he dismissed me with a shrug. But I saw it, the crack, the seed of doubt. Later that night, I stood in the study again, the document spread before me, my father's words etched into every clause. Beside them lay my notes, my careful handwriting marking the dates, the evidence, the pattern of betrayal. This wasn't just about love anymore. It wasn't even just about betrayal. It was about legacy, about power, about reminding Ryan that everything he thought was his company, his mistress, his illusion of control existed only because I allowed it. And soon I would take it all back. The kitchen was bathed in pale morning light, soft and cold against the marble counters. Ryan was already at the table, skimming through his tablet, a half-eaten bagel resting on a plate beside him. His tie was crooked, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked every bit the ambitious entrepreneur rehearsing deals in his head before the day had even started. I poured coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch. Silence had become my sharpest tool. It unsettled him more than any accusation ever could. Finally, I broke it. Casually. Too casually. Grace called late last night. The words landed like a pebble in still water. His head jerked up, eyes narrowing. She called me. For business. I turned, carrying my mug to the table. Strange hour for business. He forced a laugh, the sound brittle. Investors are in different time zones, Elena. You wouldn't understand. I sipped my coffee, watching him over the rim. Maybe. But you seem to think she understands everything. His smile faltered. What's that supposed to mean? I set my mug down carefully. It means you talk about her a lot. More than you talk about us. The air sharpened instantly. Ryan's jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened. He leaned forward, voice dropping into that dangerous low tone he used when charm failed him. Careful, Elena. You're starting to sound paranoid. I tilted my head, letting a faint smile play at my lips. Am I? The question was soft, but it sliced deeper than any accusation. His fingers drummed against the table faster and faster, betraying the irritation bubbling beneath his skin. You should be supporting me, he snapped, not undermining me. Grace believes in what I'm building. She actually helps. There it was, the comparison he wanted me to choke on. I leaned back, my voice calm, almost serene. Then I'm glad you found someone who believes. For a heartbeat, silence swelled between us, thick and heavy. His face darkened, confusion flickering behind his anger. He couldn't decide if I was conceding or mocking him. That uncertainty was my weapon. He slammed his tablet shut and stood abruptly. If you can't back me, stay out of my way. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up as I lifted my mug again. Of course. The words were simple, but the tone, quiet, final, rattled him. He left in a rush, muttering under his breath, his footsteps echoing down the hall. When the door shut, I allowed myself a slow exhale. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. The power balance had shifted just slightly, but enough. He had shown his temper. He had revealed how deeply my silence unnerved him. Later that evening, I replayed the morning exchange in my mind while dinner simmered on the stove. Ryan's words echoed. Grace believes in what I'm building. As though belief were currency, as though loyalty could be transferred like stock options. When he came home, the tension lingered in the air like smoke. He loosened his tie, tossed it carelessly onto a chair, and eyed me warily. You're quiet again, he said as if it were a crime. I stirred the pot gently. You've told me to stay out of your way. I'm only respecting that. He blinked, thrown by the calmness. Don't twist my words. I wouldn't dare. My voice was light, but my eyes held his. He looked away first. Dinner was eaten in silence, punctuated only by the clink of silverware against porcelain. He didn't mention Grace by name tonight, but I saw her presence in every flicker of his expression, in every restless glance at his phone. He wanted me to fight. He wanted me to demand, to cry, to give him the satisfaction of righteous indignation. Instead, I gave him nothing. That night, I stood by the window after he fell asleep. The city lights sprawled endlessly below, a glittering map of ambition and deceit. My reflection in the glass looked different now, sharper, calmer, untouchable. Ryan thought he had silenced me, but he hadn't realized silence was the only language he didn't know how to fight. He wanted me to vanish quietly, to fade into the background while Grace stepped forward. But I wasn't fading. I was waiting. Patience was a blade, and mine was nearly ready. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, chandeliers blazing above a sea of tuxedos and gowns. Another investor gathering, another stage for Ryan to preen. My heels clicked softly across the marble as I entered at his side, his hand brushing mine briefly, before pulling away, as if even touch between us was too heavy, too binding. Grace was already there, radiant, in a crimson dress that hugged her figure like armor. She moved effortlessly among the crowd, laughter spilling from her lips, her hand resting casually on the arm of one investor, then another. People flocked to her, charmed by her confidence, dazzled by her sparkle. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was performing. When Ryan introduced her to the group near the podium, his voice carried pride. Grace has been instrumental in everything we've achieved. Her vision, her instincts, they've taken this company to the next level. Instincts, vision. Words he once used for me, now handed to her like jewels. Grace turned her gaze on me, her smile warm enough for the crowd, but sharpened just for me. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You should be proud, Elena. He deserves someone who believes in him. The jab landed precise and cruel. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I met her gaze, letting silence stretch unbroken. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I simply stared. Something flickered in her expression, the faintest hesitation, a twitch at the corner of her lips. She looked away first. Ryan didn't notice. The investors didn't notice. But Grace felt it. She knew I had seen through her, and worse, that I wasn't afraid. I sipped my champagne, the bubbles sharp against my tongue, and let the silence settle over us like a curtain. My father had always said silence unnerves the guilty more than accusation ever could. Tonight, I understood. Later, as Ryan basked in laughter with a cluster of men near the stage, Grace approached me again. Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes were steel. "You're very composed," she murmured. "Most women would have made a scene by now." I tilted my head slightly, the crystal glass cool against my fingers. Why waste energy on scenes when the ending is already written? Her brows knit, confusion rippling for just a moment before she masked it with another smile. She laughed as though I had made a joke, turning away to charm the next guest. But I had seen it, the unease, the way silence had carved a crack into her confidence. When we returned home, Ryan was buoyant, humming under his breath as he loosened his tie. He didn't even notice the tension that had passed between Grace and me. "She was brilliant tonight," he said, dropping onto the sofa with a grin. "Investors adore her." I leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "She does enjoy the spotlight." He smirked. "Not everyone is afraid of it." I raised a brow. "Afraid or unwilling to waste it?" He frowned, not sure how to answer. His arrogance made him blind. He thought Grace's shine was victory. He couldn't see it was only kindling for the fire I was about to set. I walked past him, unhurried, my heels striking softly against the hardwood. "Enjoy it while it lasts." He looked up, startled, but I was already gone, the echo of my footsteps fading down the hall. In my study, I pulled the folder of documents closer. The trust, the clauses, the proof I'd gathered from his phone. My father's handwriting in the margins. My notes scrawled alongside. Grace thought she had replaced me. Ryan thought he had silenced me. But they hadn't realized that silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Tonight, Grace had seen it. For the first time, she had faltered. And soon Ryan would too. Daniel's office was darker this time, heavy curtains drawn against the midday sun. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and the subtle sweetness of old paper. He gestured me inside, and there on his desk lay a leather-bound folder thicker than the one he had shown me before. "This is what you asked for," he said. His voice was calm, but I heard the undercurrent of gravity. I sat across from him, my hands steady, though my heart thudded beneath my ribs. "All of it. All of it." He slid the folder toward me. The weight of it was almost symbolic, the legacy of my father and the lifeline he had crafted for me long before Ryan had entered my world. I opened it slowly. Page after page detailed the structure of my trust, the companies folded under its umbrella, the properties, the offshore accounts. My father's signature appeared in ink looping, and certain anchoring the words like iron. And then the clauses. The words were clear, unyielding. "No spouse, partner, or external entity shall access, transfer, or assume control without the explicit written consent of the heir. Consent that only I could give. Consent that I would never grant." My throat tightened, not with fear, but with realization. Ryan's empire, every glossy event, every investor charmed by Grace's smile, all of it rested on money funneled through me. Without me, it was air and paper. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "You hold everything, Mrs. Carter. He may posture, he may parade that woman in front of you, but without you, he collapses. You are the spine of the entire enterprise." The words struck like a match. For months I had felt erased, reduced to silence while Grace claimed the spotlight. But here on paper, the truth blazed. Ryan was nothing without me. I closed the folder carefully, pressing my palm against the leather, as though sealing it into my skin. "Then it's time he learns that." Daniel studied me. "You intend to confront him?" "Not yet," I said. My voice was steady, almost cold. Confrontation is wasted when there's no audience. He needs to fall where everyone can see it. Grace the investors the world. Otherwise, he'll twist the story and paint himself as the victim. Daniel nodded once. Your father would have been proud. He always said you were sharper than you let people believe. I rose, the folder clutched in my hands. I learned from the best. At home, I spread the documents across my study desk. The mahogany gleamed under the lamplight, papers, neatly aligned notes scribbled in my own hand. I stared at them, tracing each clause with my fingertip. I thought of Ryan's arrogance, his smug laughter as Grace charmed a room. I thought of Grace's whispered jab. He deserves someone who believes in him. They had believed I was powerless, invisible, replaceable. But here in black and white was proof that I wasn't just part of the empire. I was the empire. Without me, the company would crumble like ash in the wind. A slow smile crept across my lips. For the first time since the humiliation at the podium, I felt not just anger, but power. A calm, simmering power that radiated through me like heat. Ryan came home late that night, his tie loosened, the scent of perfume clinging faintly to his jacket. He dropped his keys on the counter, kissed my cheek distractedly, and went straight to the refrigerator. Long day, he muttered, pulling out a bottle of water. Grace and I nailed the investor prep. They can't stop praising her. I watched him, my expression smooth, unreadable. I'm sure they can't. He didn't notice the edge in my tone. He never noticed. He leaned against the counter, drinking deeply. Next week is the big one. The investors want Grace front and center again. They trust her. It's like she was made for this. Trust. That word again. I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch. Funny thing about trust. It only matters if it's real. He frowned, lowering the bottle. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing? I said, turning back to my papers. Just an observation. His eyes lingered on me, suspicion flickering, but he said nothing more. He had no idea that the very trust he praised in Grace was nothing compared to the trust he had destroyed with me, the only trust that mattered, the one binding his company to life. Later, when the house was quiet, I gathered the documents into a neat stack and locked them away in my desk drawer. I poured myself a glass of wine, the deep red catching the lamplight, and carried it to the window. The city sprawled before me, glittering and oblivious. Somewhere in those towers, Ryan was building castles of air, convinced they were made of stone. And Grace was smiling, certain she had replaced me. But I knew the truth now. I held it in my hands, in ink and signature, in clauses my father had written with foresight only he possessed. I sipped the wine, slowly savoring the weight of clarity. For the first time, I didn't feel like a wife on the sidelines. I felt like the heir I had been born to be. Ryan had mistaken my silence for weakness. But soon he would learn silence was the loudest weapon of all. The house was quiet that evening, shadows stretching long across the walls as the last traces of daylight faded. Ryan was out late again, leaving only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the faint hum of the refrigerator to keep me company. I poured myself a glass of wine and carried it into the study. The desk was still scattered with papers, the trust documents Daniel had given me, my own notes, and the printouts of Ryan's messages with Grace. The glow of the lamp pooled over them like a spotlight, illuminating the lies, the betrayals, and the lifeline of power that had always been mine. I sank into the leather chair and stared at a framed photograph on the shelf. It was from our wedding day. Ryan's smile was wide, confident, his hand gripping mine as though the world was at our feet. I had been radiant, eyes bright with belief, so certain love was enough. I picked up the frame, studying it under the lamplight. My younger self looked naive now, almost fragile. That woman had believed promises whispered in the dark, had traded her birthright for the illusion of devotion. A bitter laugh slipped from my lips. How foolish you were, I whispered to the woman in the photograph. Setting the frame aside, I pressed my fingers against my temple. The grief came then, sharp and sudden. For the years wasted, for the love I had poured into a man who saw me only as a stepping stone. My chest ached with it, the kind of ache that reminded you something had died even if the body still lived beside you. But grief shifted quickly into something colder, steadier: resolve. Ryan had taken my trust and twisted it into a weapon. Grace had paraded herself as his rightful partner. And I had been the fool who let them believe I was powerless. Not anymore. I opened a fresh notebook and set the pen to paper. The words came slowly at first, then faster, flowing like water breaking through a dam. Not diary entries, not scattered thoughts, but sentences crafted with precision. A speech. The speech I would deliver when the time was right. I wrote of betrayal not in shrill tones, but with the calm weight of truth. I wrote of trust, the financial kind, the legal kind, the emotional kind, and how it had been broken. I wrote of legacy, of my father's foresight, of the empire Ryan had claimed, but never truly owned. Each sentence was a blade. Together they formed an execution. When my hand finally stilled, the page was filled with my handwriting, sharp and certain. I read it aloud softly, my voice steady, imagining the room, the flash of cameras, the gasps of investors, as the truth unraveled before them. For the first time in months, I felt not anger, not despair, but freedom. The decision was made. When Ryan came home, it was past midnight. His tie was missing, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He smelled faintly of perfume again, the same cloying sweetness I had noticed on him before. "Long day," he muttered, tossing his jacket onto a chair. I sat in the living room, the notebook tucked away in the study, my wineglass resting on the table beside me. I watched him, my face smooth, betraying nothing. "Everything go well?" I asked. He smirked, loosening his cufflinks. "Better than expected. Grace handled the investors flawlessly. Honestly, Elena, I don't know what I'd do without her." My lips curved into a faint smile. "Neither do I." He didn't hear the weight in my words. He never did. He kissed the top of my head absently, as if I were a piece of furniture, then disappeared upstairs. I sat alone in the quiet, my smile fading into something harder. The speech was ready. The stage was waiting. And the end of my marriage was no longer a question of if, only when. The following morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen. I brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, and set 2 mugs on the table. Ryan came down in a rush, already scrolling through his phone. "Busy day again," he said, sliding into a chair. "Grace and I have the final prep for next week. It's going to be huge." I stirred sugar into my coffee. "I'll be there." He blinked, surprised. "At the presentation?" "Yes." His brows lifted. "Well, good. Maybe you'll finally see what we're building." I sipped my coffee slowly. "Oh, I'll see." The faintest flicker of unease passed across his face, but he dismissed it quickly, brushing it off as nerves before an event. He didn't realize he had just agreed to his own undoing. I smiled into my cup, my decision locked in stone. The week before the presentation unfolded like a stage rehearsal. Ryan buzzed with energy, his calendar crowded with calls and investor dinners. Grace's name threaded through every conversation, her presence a constant echo in the house, even when she wasn't physically there. I moved in silence, observing, letting him believe his world was whole. He mistook my calm for detachment, convinced I was fading into irrelevance. What he didn't see was the storm coiling beneath the surface, gathering strength with every smug smile. He flashed every careless mention of her name. On Tuesday, he glanced up from his laptop, eyes bright with excitement. "You'll be there, right? The investors will be thrilled to see us together. Finally, us. Together." I smiled faintly. "Of course." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his work. He had no idea how right he was and how wrong. The night before the presentation, I opened the velvet box hidden at the back of my dresser drawer. Inside lay the necklace my father had given my mother on their 10th anniversary, a cascade of diamonds anchored by a single sapphire the color of midnight. It wasn't just jewelry. It was legacy. I lifted it carefully, the stones cold against my skin, and fastened it around my neck. In the mirror, the necklace glittered under the lamplight, drawing the eye to my throat, My voice, the very weapon Ryan had discounted for so long. He had wanted me silent. Tomorrow my voice would destroy him. I paired the necklace with a gown of deep navy silk, simple in its cut, but commanding in presence. When I moved, the fabric whispered like secrets ready to be told. I set the dress aside for morning, folding it across the chair like armor awaiting battle. For a long moment, I stood at the mirror, tracing the lines of my face. I no longer looked like the woman in the wedding photo, wide-eyed, hopeful, trusting. I looked like my father's daughter, sharp, unyielding, ready. Ryan didn't notice the shift. He spent the evening on the phone, pacing the study, laughing loudly at something Grace said on the other end. He emerged just long enough to pour himself a drink, kiss my cheek absently, and retreat again. I sipped my wine in silence, the taste rich and grounding. Tomorrow would end everything. Morning arrived with a crisp chill in the air, autumn's first bite threading through the wind. I dressed slowly, carefully, sliding the navy gown over my skin, fastening the necklace with steady hands. My heels clicked against the hardwood as I descended the stairs. Ryan waited by the door, adjusting his cufflinks. When he turned and saw me, he froze for half a second. "You look..." He trailed off, then smiled. "Perfect. Investors love elegance." I inclined my head, saying nothing. On the drive to the venue, he filled the silence with chatter about projections, growth charts, potential acquisitions. I let his words wash over me, meaningless noise. My gaze stayed fixed on the horizon where the city skyline pierced the morning light like jagged teeth. "Grace is nervous," he said at one point, chuckling. "She wants everything to be flawless, but she'll crush it. You'll see." I turned to him, my expression unreadable. "Yes, I'll see." The venue was grander than the last, an opulent hall filled with rows of gleaming chairs and towering screens that projected the company's logo. Investors milled about, sipping champagne, murmuring with anticipation. Photographers hovered at the edges, lenses glinting. Grace stood near the stage, radiant in emerald green, her hair swept into a sleek chignon. She spotted me across the room and smirked, her eyes sweeping over my gown, my necklace, my calm. She leaned toward Ryan, whispering something that made him laugh. They both looked at me, certain I was the outsider in the room. But I wasn't the outsider. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. I took my seat in the front row, folding my hands in my lap, the diamonds at my throat catching the light. My expression was serene, but my pulse beat steady, certain. The stage was set. Tomorrow's empire would not belong to Ryan. It would belong to me. The hall buzzed with anticipation, a low hum of whispered speculation and clinking glasses. Investors filled every seat, their pens ready, their eyes sharp. At the center of it all stood the stage, bathed in white light, waiting for its star. Ryan strode out first, radiating triumph. His suit was immaculate, his smile wide, the image of a man about to claim his crown. Grace followed, emerald silk, shimmering under the lights. She walked beside him, not behind her, chin high, as if she had already replaced me. The applause thundered, cameras flashing. I sat in the front row, diamonds at my throat catching the light. My face was calm, unreadable, but my heart beat with a steady rhythm, each pulse counting down to detonation. Ryan raised his hand, commanding silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. What you are about to witness is the future, the culmination of vision, dedication, and partnership." His hand brushed Grace's arm. She stepped forward, her smile bright, polished. "This company is not just a dream," she said. "It is a revolution. Built on trust, on loyalty, on the belief that greatness comes when the right people stand beside each other. Trust. Loyalty." The words rang hollow in my ears. Applause rose again. Cameras flashed brighter. Ryan beamed, his hand resting on the small of her back. She looked radiant, smug, untouchable. And then I stood. The movement cut through the room like a blade. Whispers rippled across the crowd as I stepped onto the stage, heels clicking against the polished floor. Ryan froze, his smile faltering. Grace's eyes widened, confusion flashing before disdain returned. I reached the podium, my necklace glinting under the lights. My voice carried clear and calm, slicing through the silence. Good afternoon. For those who don't know me, my name is Elena Carter, daughter of the late Charles Carter, sole heir to his fortune. And the reason this company exists at all. A gasp rippled through the audience. Pens paused. Cameras clicked furiously. Ryan recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. Elena, sweetheart, now's not. Don't, I said softly, but the microphone carried it sharp as steel. The room stilled. I turned toward the audience, my hands steady on the podium. For months I have sat quietly while my husband paraded his mistress before you. For months I have endured the humiliation of seeing Grace Williams play the role of partner both in business and in life, and for months you have been led to believe this empire was his. Gasps, murmurs. Grace's face blanched. Ryan's jaw clenched, panic flickering in his eyes. I lifted the folder from my bag, its weight heavy with legacy. But what you don't know is this. Every dollar, every contract, every partnership Ryan has presented to you was funded through me, through the Carter Trust. A trust my father built, protected with ironclad clauses. Clauses that state no spouse, no partner, no one, not Ryan, not Grace, can access a cent without my consent. I opened the folder, letting the papers fan across the podium. And today I withdraw that consent. The room erupted, gasps, shouts, the frantic clicking of cameras. Investors turned to one another, panic flashing in their eyes. Ryan surged forward, his voice desperate. Elena, don't do this. You'll ruin everything. I looked at him, calm as ice. No, Ryan. You ruined everything the moment you betrayed me. Grace stepped forward, her composure cracking. You can't just. I said, cutting her off. Because while you two were busy building your fantasy, I remembered something you both forgot. This was never yours to take. It was mine to allow. I straightened, letting my gaze sweep the room. To every investor here, know this: Ryan Carter no longer has my backing. His company is a house built on sand, and as of this moment, the tide has come in. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. And then chaos. Investors stood, some shouting, some already gathering their things. Phones lit up, frantic calls beginning before the dust had even settled. Photographers surged forward, capturing every angle of Ryan's pale face, Grace's trembling hands, my unflinching calm. I stepped back from the podium, the diamonds at my throat glinting under the flashbulbs. Enjoy the spotlight, Grace, I murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. It burns. And then I turned, walking off the stage as the empire behind me crumbled. The news broke before I even reached home. By the time I slipped off my heels and set down my bag, headlines were already flooding the internet. Carter Empire collapses in scandal. CEO's affair exposed at investor summit. Heiress withdraws. Support millions lost overnight. The world didn't need time to process. It devoured the story whole, chewing through every detail with ravenous delight. By morning, it was everywhere, my face framed in diamonds, Ryan's pale expression beside Grace's stunned disbelief. I sat in my father's study, the walls lined with leather-bound books that smelled faintly of dust and wisdom. A glass of wine rested on the desk, deep red, catching the lamplight. The same desk where my father once made decisions that shaped fortunes now held me. His daughter sitting in the ruins of a marriage, but not in defeat. On the television across the room, reporters dissected the fallout. Investors had pulled out within hours. Contracts had dissolved. Grace had vanished from the public eye, her social media wiped clean. Ryan was a ghost in the photographs. Head bowed, shoulders slumped, a man undone, not by bad luck, but by his own arrogance. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. And in part, I did. But as I stared into the wine swirling in my glass, a quieter truth surfaced. Victory carries grief with it. I thought of our wedding day, of laughter that once felt real, of whispered promises under starlight. I thought of the man I had loved before power warped him, before betrayal made him cruel. That man was gone long before Grace. Maybe he had never existed at all. Tears pricked at my eyes, but they didn't fall. I wasn't mourning Ryan. I was mourning the years I had lost believing in him. The clock ticked steadily in the background. Time moved on indifferent to my pain. I set the glass down and walked to the window. The city sprawled before me, glittering alive, uncaring. Somewhere out there, people were still gossiping, speculating, dissecting every detail of my speech. But here in this study, it was quiet. I pressed my hand against the glass, the cool surface grounding me. My reflection stared back, not the naive wife who once smiled blindly at Ryan, but a woman reborn in fire and betrayal. Elena Carter, heir, survivor, avenger. I whispered the name aloud, tasting the weight of it. For too long, I had been defined as Ryan's wife, the silent partner, the woman in the shadows. Now the world knew better. Now I knew better. Behind me, the television droned on, reporters speculating about Ryan's next move. Bankruptcy, lawsuits, public disgrace. None of it mattered anymore. His empire was ashes, and I had walked away untouched. I turned off the television, silencing the noise. The house felt empty, but it was my emptiness now. Not his, not Grace's, mine. I returned to the desk and pulled open the drawer where the trust documents lay. My father's handwriting stared back at me, his foresight etched into every clause. I traced his signature with my fingertip, a soft smile tugging at my lips. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing what I couldn't, for protecting me even from myself." I closed the folder, locking it away again. The empire was safe. My future was mine to command. The wine was nearly gone, the bottle half empty. I poured one last glass and raised it to the empty room. "To endings," I said softly. "And beginnings." I drank deeply, the taste rich and sharp. When I set the glass down, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The story had begun with humiliation, with applause that drowned me, with a mistress basking in stolen light. But it ended here with silence that belonged to me, with power reclaimed, with the truth no longer buried beneath lies. I turned off the lamp, letting the study fall into darkness. The city lights spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the room. I walked away from the desk, away from the documents, away from the ghost of Ryan. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking alone. I felt my father's presence, steady and proud, as if he were beside me. And I smiled, because I had survived, because I was Elena Carter, and because the future was mine.